Hello, everyone, from the Berkshire Taconic branch. We have more than 100 people signed up, but only 39 are on right now. But we're going to begin in any case. You've come to uncovering Leonardo's heresy in his Virgin of the Rocks with Andrew Linnell. So yeah, say a few words about Andrew. Andrew Linnell is a graduate of the University of Michigan. In 1979, he took a year off from his job at IBM to attend Emerson College. Now retired after a 42-year career in the computer industry, Andrew has been administering several Facebook groups, including Anthroposophy, building an organization called MISTech, and writing when time permits. MISTech is an organization that seeks to cultivate the healthy application of technology and its mysteries into our evolving human life. He has two children's books with Mercury Press, The Dance of the Elves and From the Forest to the Sea. And he recently published his research of 35 years in a book entitled Hidden Heretic of the Renaissance, Leonardo. He is working now on a companion book called The Uncomfortable History of Christianity, while he continues to work on his major tome, The Role of Technology in Human Evolution. So we welcome you to this group, and I'm happy everyone is here. We've probably got a lot more people because we can reach out through the electronic media, so I'm grateful for that. Even though we're not seeing Andrew in person, I'm sure it will be a great presentation. Okay, Andrew, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. And it really is, in a way, a disappointment, but a blessing in disguise that I couldn't be there physically. Right. But because of COVID, now we've opened this up to all who wanted to see this as a webinar. And I also want to just say that I'm proud of the work I've done for MISTech and other things, but I will say that in many ways, I feel that this work is the most important right now for me. I am delighted to be able to present all this years of research. I want to give you all a bit of warning though, before we dig in, that this is a 90-minute presentation and I need you to hold your questions till the end. So I know it's a long time to wait sometimes, but I also may sound a bit like a prosecutor at times trying to make his case, but I'll try to keep it suspenseful. Besides admiring Leonardo da Vinci's artistic brilliance, in this lecture we're also going to explore the theological enigmas posed in his painting, The Virgin of the Rocks. This masterpiece has baffled art historians for centuries. I will reveal what these years of research, actually by many, including myself, have uncovered concerning the mysteries embedded within this exquisite painting. By the way, the slides from this talk will be available at the website you see here, thechristianmysteries.com. So, let's see if this is working. In 1978, I toured the National Gallery in London. While there, I came to this painting. It was displayed so that one could look at it from behind as well as on each side. Behind was Leonardo's signature. But when you came to the side, I'm trying to show what you would see here. There was a panel of wood on which the painter would put the oils on, and then when they were done, they would put a varnish over the whole thing. But when I looked at this painting, and this is what it looked like at the time, I noticed an odd feature. The staff of John the Baptist was above the varnish. Turned out there were also 3 halos above the varnish. This puzzled me and began this 35-year search for answers. To get me off my duff, though, 30 years after this incident in 2009, I read in horror that the National Gallery planned to refurbish this painting. Such restorations removed all the yellowed varnish, but it also should possibly remove this staff and halo above the varnish. What would then happen to my arguments here? So after the restoration, would there be nothing above the varnish? Well, luckily, you can see the before and after here, they removed the varnish right up to those halos and the staff. There's something about the material that was used that made for these to not deteriorate as rapidly as the varnish does over time. So what did it affect? Well, you can see obviously that the colors were changed. We might even say that we went from this yellowed view to one in which the characters are illuminated by moonlight. Now, in this lecture tonight, we will begin with the question, why was there paint above the varnish? But we'll follow my search that will lead us to more questions about Virgin of the Rocks. During this talk, we'll explore some of the painting's history. We'll find that through something called the Platonic Academy in Florence, Leonardo learned about not only Plato and Neoplatonism, but also about the great theological debates of early Christianity. What he has depicted in Virgin of the Rocks would have been considered a heresy in the 15th century. So we'll look at why I make that claim. So there are 2 paintings, and one I saw in the Louvre in Paris, in addition to the one in the National Gallery. It was easy for me to see that these 2 were quite different. Compare these 2 paintings. Notice first their similarities, but also their differences. Painters at this time did not paint to sell. They got a commission for a particular painting. They typically had patrons who supported them. The reason for 2 was not, hey, buddy, this painting sells, so let's get rich and make lots of copies in my studio. No, because the early histories of these paintings has remained largely unknown, debate once raged about which of these 2, Virgin of the Rocks, was the original and which one was the copy. Most art historians today agree that the version at the Louvre is the original, but this does not answer the question, why 2? And then just a few years ago, Carlo Pedretti, who's unfortunately passed now, put on a show or an exhibit in northern Italy where he showed this 3rd painting that has been in a private collection in Switzerland. So art historians have written much about these paintings. You know, both are oils, both are about 2 meters, both were on wooden panels, although the one at the Louvre, I don't know how they did this, they transferred it to canvas. So art historians would say we have Mary, the Madonna here, then we would have the Christ child and John the Baptist. And lastly, we would have some angel over here with wings. The wings, I would say, are kind of hard to see, but these are the wings to this angel. When we look at Leonardo's earliest painting that he did with his teacher Verrocchio, we would actually have to conclude that's not an angel, unless an angel means all spiritual beings of the heavenly hierarchies, but an archangel. We can see how similar these two archangels are. The National Gallery doesn't claim that in their painting, which I'm actually showing here the Louvre's painting, this archangel is Uriel. And they say that because Uriel was the archangel of the summer months when John the Baptist was supposedly born. But this begs the question, why is this woman, perhaps the Madonna, with John the Baptist and the archangel with the Christ child? That just doesn't make any sense. So if it's not John the Baptist, who else could it be? And perhaps the central figure isn't Mary, but if it's not, who might it be? So again, let's take a few moments to see some of the other differences. Normally, I would give the audience time to point them out, but since we're online, I can't really do that. So I'll have to point out some of the differences. Here we can see this halo around this child and this staff here to identify this child as John the Baptist. But I also want you to notice the rocks here. And when I go to a picture of the painting at the Louvre, notice how the rocks change. Now, geologists have been asked, and they would say, these rocks are authentic, while these rocks are not. These are an artist's rendition, probably not painted by Leonardo. We also know that some other things are not painted by Leonardo, including the flowers that we saw, and we'll come back to that. But I want you to also notice the difference in the gaze. Where is she gazing, the angel, archangel, and where is this one gazing? Why is that important? From an esoteric perspective, we know that higher beings don't see in the physical world. They can only see the reflection of it in the souls of humans. Thus, the archangel must gaze into the reflecting pool to know what is happening. Notice how the painter has used the sleeve like stage curtains to draw our attention to the hand gestures. In the original, 3 hands are on this stage, but in the copy, only 2. We can see the archangel's right arm and hand down by her side, whereas here we have the hand pointing across to the other child and her left hand supporting this infant. Notice now the faces of both of these children. Imagine, what is this child feeling or thinking, and compare that to this child. I won't try to answer those, but I will just ask you, keep in mind the story of Prometheus, who was chained to the rock. This child is the only one whose hand touches the rock element, the earth. The hand gestures are critical to understanding. Now we're going to look at the so-called St. John the Baptist staff, which you see here. And remember, this is painted on top of the varnish, as is this halo. This woman's hand we see in both paintings very similarly. But what is the gesture of this hand? Is it supporting? Is it a loving gesture? Could you say maybe it's drawing something from this child? Oh, I also meant to, well, I'll bring it up here. If you'll notice here, this child has some kind of translucent wrap around, whereas this one's completely naked. Why might that be? Well, if we look back at the story of Adam and Eve, after the fall, it is said that they were embarrassed by their bodies and what was becoming of their bodies. Lastly, notice the hand gestures again, this hand and this hand. What is being said by those hands? So this will review a number of the changes we saw. We saw here that these flowers are actually botanically impossible. Some of them have 5 petals, some have 6. Over here, everything is botanically accurate. We saw the staff here, it's not over here. We saw halos, we saw the gaze. We see different colors in these 2 archangels. But we'll see there's lots more. We also saw that the rocks are different. And we can also say that we have moon colors here and perhaps sun colors here. I'm now going to divide this picture at the Louvre in half for a reason. We can say that geometry, and I won't go into all of this, even sacred geometry, was very important to all the Renaissance paintings and to Leonardo in particular, whose own academy had the words that said, "Let no one here enter who is not a geometrician." So now that we've drawn this line, we can say that this woman in the center straddles this center line. What would it mean that she straddles this center? Now I want to draw your attention to the circled windows, as I call them, in the back, where you can see through the rocks. We can say that this circle is above this child, and so this child must relate to that, whereas over here, the child on the right relates to this window. We'll go into those in a little bit. But I want to give you some background to the education that Leonardo received, as well as what his times, the feelings and the emotions, the social life and the religious life were like. So the Renaissance really begins in Florence, and you can see it up here in the map where it was located. At this time, for one to have been recognized as a scholar, one would need to have been educated in both Greek and Latin, because Leonardo was unschooled in Greek and Latin. Many of these scholars shunned Leonardo. Yet, as the Renaissance man and his brilliance in so many fields, he was loved and highly respected by clergy and the populace, as well as the rulers of that time, the de Medicis in particular in Florence. The Renaissance is known as the rebirth of Greek philosophy. What teachings was Leonardo exposed to? Did any of these teachings find their way into his paintings? We will need to account for the historical situation at the start of the Renaissance, especially in regards to the Roman Church. But we'll jump back to start with to the golden age of Greece, where Greek philosophy had grown out of its many mystery centers. Plato even describes an initiation experience in his books. Christianity was brought forth by multiple apostles. We know that they did not agree with each other. Some professors have used the term multiple Christianities to describe this early Christian times. Constantine sought to end the theological bickerings by calling for a council. Although it was not the first council, the Nicene Council was the first ecumenical council, but it caused a major split in Christianity. Many of the Christians, one in particular, influenced Europe, and that would be the Christianity of Arius. His initiate, Wolfius, converted the barbarians, the Gothic tribes, to Christianity, to Arian Christianity. This would sweep all over Europe and into northern Africa. But as we will see, the church sought to unite all of the Christianities into one, a uniform, universal Catholic church. Opposition was at first meant exile, but later it meant extermination. By the end of the 4th century, the Roman Church had driven out all other forms of Christianity except for Arianism. By the 6th century, Gothic barbarians had conquered much of Europe and driven out the Romans. As just mentioned, these Gothic tribes had already converted to the Christianity of Arius. But through a deceit called the donation of Constantine, the Vatican would survive the conquerings of these Gothic tribes and eventually convert these Arians to Catholicism. The Dark Ages were underway. At the end of the 8th century, the Frankish king Charlemagne sent envoys to Baghdad to the court of Harun al-Rashid, who sent teachers back with these envoys. Charlemagne set these teachers to work to build an educational system for the Holy Roman Empire, the future France. Aristotle was foremost of what these scholars brought from the schools around Baghdad, which was at the time the cultural capital of the world. The light of the Greek philosophers became lit at the school associated with Chartres Cathedral. 2 centuries later, the Crusades and St. Francis, who sought to overcome the corruption of the church after receiving his marching orders, "Rebuild my church," began. Following the Crusades, a number of groups would carry remnants of Greek culture, its associated mystery knowledge, and all back into Europe. Groups such as the Templar Knights, the Cathars, and the Kabbalists brought tidbits like homeopathic remedies. Of the many Christianities that existed during the period of early Christianity, one that few Westerners know about is the Eastern Christian Church. How was its Christianity different? Its founder, Nestorius, who lived from 386 to 451, had risen up to become the Patriarch of Constantinople. When he and his followers rejected the Council of Ephesus in 431 and its adoption of the Mother of God, known as the Theotokos, they were forced to form their own church. They later absorbed the Christianities of Thomas, Mani, some of Arius, Montanus, Gnostics, and others. The theological battle of the times, the doctrine of Diophysite and Monophysite, these are the two answers to the question of the separateness of the divine and human natures, or in other words, was Christ and Jesus one and the same from birth? Roman Catholicism came to believe in Jesus, that he was a man, but also God from birth, while the Eastern Church worshiped the cosmic Christ who came to the man Jesus. This church should not be confused with the Greek Orthodox Church that from Constantinople coexisted with what is today the Roman Catholic Church. The Great Schism of 1054 split the Roman Church into Latin and Greek churches. Then between the 9th and 14th century at its height, this Church of the East represented the world's largest church, the largest Christian church. It stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to Mongolia, to India, and China. It enjoyed coexistence with Islam until the Mongol Nestorian Christian army of Hulagu destroyed Baghdad in 1258. Sorry, I didn't get all the clicks until here. Now I want to bring your attention to a particular person who I would call the preparer of the Renaissance, Emmanuel Chrysoloras. He was an envoy to the church in Rome and came to Florence. As an envoy, his goal was to try to seek Western military help. So he came in 1391. By 1396, he was teaching at the University of Florence, where he gave lectures on the Greek philosophers. And sitting in his audience was Roberto de Rossi, who was the tutor for Cosimo de' Medici. He went on to teach in a number of other universities in Italy. So it was Chrysoloras who inspired Florentine missions to save ancient texts in the East. And you can see a bunch of these where people went to the East to retrieve texts there on early Christianity and on the mystery knowledge that had been recorded and on Greek philosophers. But most important, and someone that is remarkably unknown and untaught in history, was George Gemistus Plethon. He was born in Constantinople, as we see in 1355, and he's going to die in Mistra, which looks like the name mystery, which is near Sparta in Greece in 1452. We note that date because that's the same year that Leonardo was born. Here was a mysterious man whose influence on the Renaissance was deep and massive. In 1428, the Byzantine Emperor John VIII had asked Gemistus, how can the split between the Latin and Greek churches be united? 10 years later, the opportunity came. The Council of Florence was to happen in 1438, and for this purpose, Plethon accompanied other envoys, even though he was 83 years old. And he was sent because of his renowned wisdom and morality. But note, Plethon was not a Christian. He would have called himself a pagan, a follower of the stream of the ancient mysteries. So while in Florence, Plethon offered to give a few lectures. Because of these, he was invited to set up a school in Florence where he lectured on the differences between Plato and Aristotle. And Cosimo de' Medici attended these lectures. He became so excited that he went and founded the Accademia Platonica. And later he installed Marsilio Ficino as its head. Students of Plethon continued to teach there well after the council ended. It was never established, though, as a university. One can say it was more as a club for philosophy. Some of Plethon's lectures were later summarized in a book, and I like to call Plethon the catalyst for the Renaissance based on his teachings, but also a trunk full of books that he gave to the Medicis, of which Ficino was the lead translator, and they translated these into Latin. But you can see the influence of Platon in the Renaissance paintings that tried to compare Greek mythology to Christianity. We can see here the representation that St. Paul called the human being, that the Greeks would have agreed, beings of body, soma, soul, psyche, and spirit, pneuma. So who was Platon? We only need to lift one veil to find out how remarkable Platon was. He was called a prince among philosophers. Marsilio Ficino called him the second Plato. Even the Cardinal Bessarion, asked, is Plato's soul in this body? It is remarkable how close a cardinal came to expressing the concept of reincarnation. Of course, fundamental to Platonic philosophy was the concept of the transmigration of soul. Platon was granted the utmost scholarly respect. He was considered to be the foremost authority on Greek philosophy and the ancient mysteries of the time. Even his name is derived from Plato. Platon believed that the West was influenced by a materialistic interpretations of Aristotle that Harun al-Rashid had sent via Charlemagne. Platon was well versed not only in Plato and Aristotle, but also in Zoroaster and therefore Zarathustrianism and the ancient mysteries. Surprisingly, he took with him to Florence this trunk of books. And as I said, the de Medicis put together a team to translate them. In these were doctrines of Zoroaster, Plato, Plotinus, and many of the Neoplatonists, but Byzantines had other great scholars and much wisdom that were embedded in these books. The books also included books about Hermes Trismegistus, who was likely the source of Ficino's Orphic system of natural magic. So we even see in the cathedral in Siena that Hermes Trismegistus appears on a mosaic on the floor, just how important he had become. Now, it's fascinating to ask, what did he do in Florence that made him so revered and so loved? That after he died, an expedition was sent to dig up his remains and reinter them back in the next door city, Rimini, to Florence. We can also ask, he returned to Greece. Why? To found a mystery center. Well, who could seriously do such a thing unless they were a legitimate initiate? And that would ask the question, were others then initiated by him? This plaque here on his grave says, so that the great teacher may be among free men. So we know that he was born in 1452, Leonardo da Vinci, and by the age of 8, he had been enrolled in a school in Florence, and at the age of 12 in Verrocchio's, which was the leading school in all of Italy. At that school were the next generation of great artists, Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, Perugino, Lorenzo di Credi. And by the time Leonardo was getting ready to sort of graduate, the next crop of artists included Michelangelo and Raphael. By the age of 20, Leonardo had been admitted to the Artists Guild called St. Luke. And at the age of 24, something happened where he and a group of other men were arrested for being nude together. But the charges were later dropped, in part because one in his group was part of the de Medici household, of which then Leonardo himself joins at age 28. He also becomes a member of the Garden of San Marcos. This was a place, a convent that had a wonderful library and a wonderful garden where the great philosophers, when they weren't at the Platonic Academy, would hang out and discuss philosophy while walking around in the gardens or working in the libraries researching. So I came to the conclusion that Leonardo must have attended the Platonic Academy and listened to lectures and discussed things with its philosophers. We know that from another journal that Michelangelo was attending lectures and events at this academy, so it was very likely that Leonardo was as well. We also know that he must have known Ficino quite well because he painted him. And he must have known about the other philosophers. Here you see, not by Leonardo, three of the other great philosophers that worked at the Platonic Academy. But I won't go into all of these right now. But things were not all rosy and wonderful. At this time, there was you might say, a counterbalance to the Renaissance, led by a Girolamo Savonarola. And he was a monk who found much of what was going on in the Renaissance to be nearly heretical, if not in, expressing vanity and so on. He was not a fan. And he encouraged and inspired mobs to burn books and burn artwork in the public square. So word of him was obviously Leonardo would have known about him. And it was Savonarola who actually drove out the de Medicis into exile in 1494. So Leonardo is going to leave in 1482 because of all of these mobs and wanting to protect his paintings. So he moves to Milan and forms his own academy up there, where sacred geometry and other things, and Plato, of course, were taught. We might also ask before he left, and also while he was in Milan, did he have any association with the Kabbalists? Did he know about any of the teachings or any of the remnants of the Cathars or of the Knights Templars? So we mentioned that Leonardo arrived in Florence in 1482, and he traveled with his paintings that he didn't want the Savonarola mobs to get a hold of. In 1485, his academy in Milan was active. There's some indications that it might have started as early as 1483. In 1492, the leading mathematician and geometrician Luca Pacioli was invited to teach there. But a war started in 1499 as the King of France invaded and he claimed rights. So Leonardo left Milan at the start of the Second Italian War and would eventually return to Florence in 1501. And I want you to remember that date, 1501. And one of the sad things is he was in the process when this war happened, of building this gigantic horse statue, but unfortunately the French troops used it for target practice. We also know that Leonardo returned to Milan in 1506, and he was required to come back to finish that second painting, that copy, and we'll go into just a little bit more of that history. In 1515, he had moved to Rome, and then in 1516, he moves for the final time to France under the invitation of the king, where he eventually will die at Clos-Lucé in France on the 2nd of May in 1519 at the age of 67. I want to tell you a little story of the Pistis Sophia. And we know that the first written copy was not found and recorded in history until 1773, which would be well after Leonardo's times. But we don't know what may have been in the books that these people brought, because most of them ended up in the libraries of the Vatican, and many of them haven't been seen since, including Platon's books. So, but there's something about this story in the Pistis Sophia that made me think that Leonardo knew about this. And it's chapters 59 through 62, which refer to two children, two messiahs, and two families, two boys, one of which is about the age of 12, and is working in a vineyard. And the other spirit of the other boy comes to him. Mary ties him somehow to a bed and goes and fetches the other boy who is working with his father in the vineyard. And it says they come back and they become united. It also talks about, the quote is, "Thou also, Mary, and thou and the other Mary," referring to two Marys. In chapter 62, this becoming united is described, where he comes back from the vineyard and he says, "He embraced thee, he kissed thee, and thou also didst kiss him, and you became one." Remember this becoming one. The other Mary came forward, it says in chapter 62. So we can't really go into all of these things, but it's interesting that Leonardo painted over 30 paintings that looked like this one, which is one of the few surviving paintings. And it was called Kissing Babes until pornographic sites took that name. And so now it's called Holy Infants Embracing. What you see here is from Hugues van Cleve, who is called the Leonardo of the North, from a Flemish school. Many of the Flemish artists came to Leonardo's Academy in Milan, and they obviously picked up this Holy Infants Embracing theme and took it back and taught it to Hugues van Cleve. So here you see two other paintings by Hugues van Cleve that he did in his studio. And we can see that these are quite related. You see the bird here and the bird here. Much of the rest looks quite similar. We have another bird here and a butterfly down here on the bottom. But so he did quite a number of different studies. I'm not going to show them all, but here you see from his school how Leonardo's inspiration, I'm going to show, gradually fades away. On the top row, we have Hugues van Cleve and one of his students. And then on the bottom, we have the next generation of students. And you can see how this inspiration, how this insight is fading away. In fact, in these paintings that I will show, you'll see that this gets quite along, where one of the artists here decided to try to make it clear that this one must be John the Baptist by putting in the staff of John the Baptist into the painting. But they still had that scene of the Holy Spirit descending, as you can see in some of these. So there's something that was there in Leonardo regarding that was lost to these later artists. I'm showing you now one of Leonardo's students called Marco Doggiano, and Marco Doggiano's painting is called the Thulan Madonna. You see here the same scene of the two children embracing. You see a hand gesture that should remind us of the Virgin of the Rocks. And this hand gesture on her left hand, our right, is also similar, but it's above the Book of Wisdom. Now we'll keep that in mind, and that begs the question, is this Madonna somehow related to the goddess of wisdom, Sophia? So here we see the one hand gesture circled, and we can ask the question, if the slaughter of the innocents was about to happen, why are they, what are they doing? Shouldn't they be running off to Egypt right now? This painting by another student, Bernardino Luini, is called The Holy Family. And here we also can note the hand gestures. This hand and this hand are very, very similar to the Virgin of the Rocks. And again, he's used these holy infants embracing as the theme between the hands. So let's compare now Luini's painting to the Virgin of the Rocks. You can see the hand gestures, this hand comparing to this hand comparing to this. But instead of the two children apart next to these hands, they're between, and she's making this embracing gesture. Notice even the tilt of the heads are at the same angle. So now we're coming to a painting by Bernardino de Conti here on the left, and we're comparing it to the Thulan Madonna by Marco Doggiano. And now we see the hands here in Bernardino de Conti's are different. Here, her hand that we see on the left is similar to the hand that would have been on the right. And so he's also curved this hand over the book to resemble something like the hand that would be behind the child in Virgin of the Rocks. But I also want you to see the background here is obviously telling us he knows about the Virgin of the Rocks, and he's painting the same background that we see in the Virgin of the Rocks. So now we can look down at these two children and say, if he knows about that, is he telling us something about these two children? Now look at their halos. This one has a circular halo, but this one has 3 nails in his head. What does that tell you? To me, it tells me that this is the child here who will be nailed onto the cross. So we can ask, which of these will be the Jesus who is crucified? We can also say that compared to the Virgin of the Rocks, then these children are reversed. The hand gestures tell us that. The children tell us that. So de Conti was telling us that neither of these children is John the Baptist. See how the hands are reversed here in the Virgin of the Rocks compared to Decanti's. There's no archangel here, but the book replaces the archangel. Notice the rocks. The rocks are sort of somewhere in between here at the reflecting pool from the copy, which is at the National Gallery, and here the one at the Louvre. So what is Decanti trying to tell us? He's trying to show that these children are reversed in the kissing babes or the holy infants embracing, but they are the same children in Virgin of the Rocks. And we also see that the backgrounds are telling us that they're the same, that he is telling us something about Virgin of the Rocks by using the same background. So he does paint another one, Bernardino Decanti, and in this one, you can see this child definitely is John the Baptist. And here he gives him a circular halo, but here he continues to use the 3 nails driven into the head of this infant. Now, if we look at the windows, what do we see in the windows? We see 2 scenes that obviously cannot go together. If this is a window and this is a window, they obviously aren't looking out at the same horizon. So this is an impossibility. He's telling us in a clue that this is an impossibility in a sense. We also see, strangely, a bird in this hand clasp. Does he know about Use von Cleve's use of birds? Or is that going a little bit too far? Now, Bernardino Decanti gives us the smoking gun. What I'm about to show you on this slide will totally reveal to you what the students knew and what they tried to reveal about Virgin of the Rocks. Who should be here between these 2 children who are giving us the gestures of Virgin of the Rocks? Well, if we look now, if we take away the block, we can see that he's got John the Baptist standing over the Jordan River where where Jesus would be baptized. You see here the 3 nails in the head as the halo for this child. And you see no halo, although a little kind of reflection. You see the royal robes behind this and this semi sort of translucent royal cloth around his midsection, telling us that this is the royal one, the kingly one. But this is the one who will be on the cross. And John the Baptist is neither of them. So here the boys are not reversed. They are in the same positions as in Virgin of the Rocks. And notice now in here, John the Baptist is taking the place of what we call the Madonna, doing the transfer. His hand gesture is taking from this one and giving to this one. We see that in the Virgin of the Rocks, taking from this one, giving to this one, taking from this one, giving to this one. Same hand gestures here, so these 2 boys are in their right position. But having John the Baptist here tells us that this one is not John the Baptist, nor is this one, obviously. And this one having kingly robes tells us something about that one. Now it's interesting, Raphael makes this painting in 1505. Well, we heard that Leonardo had left for Milan in 1482. And so in 1483, he's painting it all up there. So Raphael isn't even born until 1483. So Leonardo didn't even know him until he comes back. He comes back to Florence and learns about this incredible painter, Raphael. And 4 years later, he's inspired Raphael to paint this. Notice the hand gesture. Notice the halos. But notice John the Baptist is here. This child has a halo, and notice he's in one of the Madonna gestures holding this script. So Raphael has tied together his own paintings with Virgin of the Rocks, obviously inspired by Leonardo. So we need to find some background to tell us how Leonardo came to this understanding, because the books and so on of the heretics had largely been destroyed. So one of the things that we have found after, and so of course in recent times, are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are attributed to the Essene community in Qumran. The Essenes would be called the esoteric of the three Jewish groups, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes. Their scrolls were discovered in 1497. 11 caves have been found, over 872 scrolls in them. And as a quick synopsis, we can say that many of these scrolls that were discussing future times described the coming of two messiahs, a Messiah of Israel and a Messiah of David, a Messiah that would be priestly and a Messiah that would be kingly. And these would come from the lineages of the priestly lines and a kingly line. Now, to really understand this, I think there's been a misunderstanding of the word Messiah. Is the Messiah a human or a god? In these Dead Sea Scrolls, there is the statement of the two becoming one that we heard in the Pistis Sophia. One of these, called the Damascus document, talks about the Messiah, which is the son of Joseph, sounds like a human to me, will be made one with the son of David, but he will be killed. Boy, does that sound like something coming up. From 11Q document called Melchizedek, the word that's used that is translated as Messiah, and my Hebrew is not good enough, but it's also translated as herald, this Mabasser, I guess, talks about a Davidic royal Messiah in a second priestly, like Aaron, who was the high priest. Also in the Damascus document, we hear the Messiah, which is the son of Joseph, will be made one with the son of David. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that. Sorry, my mistake. Also, we find there the testament of the 12 patriarchs. And this would have been available to Leonardo because other copies of this existed besides in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And a version of this was translated in the 13th century. One of them, the Testament of Simeon, the quote would say, "For the Lord will raise up from Levi," that's the priestly line, "someone as a high priest, and from Judah, someone as king. He will save all the Gentiles and the tribe of Israel." In the Kabbalah, the book of Zohar, a quote would say, another Messiah, so we've already talked about one, the son of Joseph, will unite himself with the Messiah, the son of David. But the son of Joseph will not remain in life. He will be killed and will become alive again when the little hill receives life upon the great hill. If you're not totally amazed, you know, I was so surprised when I came upon these. Then we will find even in the Old Testament that there are all sorts of sayings. Well, there's three main ones. In Zechariah, we find these are the two anointed ones. Anointed means Messiah, that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. In Numbers, we hear, there shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. And in Ezekiel, they, meaning the sticks of Judah and Joseph, which were the allegories given, shall become one in thine hand. This becoming one is something we will need to answer. So many of these prophets and these writers were expecting two messiahs, and then later some kind of merging, becoming one. Let's take a look at the New Testament and the two stories of the birth of Jesus. In Matthew, we hear about a lineage that goes from Abraham through David to King Solomon. In Luke, we hear about a priestly lineage that goes upwards from Nathan, the son of David, the son of, to finally we get to Abraham, and then he keeps going, the son of, up to Adam, who was the son of God. In Matthew, the angel speaks to Joseph, and Luke to Mary. In Matthew, they're middle-aged of royal lineage. In Luke, they're poor and young. In Matthew, they live in Bethlehem. In Luke, they had to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem to be taxed. And so they come for that night when Jesus was born to a stable in Bethlehem because the inn was full. Whereas in Matthew, they're comfortable in their setting in their home. In Matthew, the Magi come from the east. In Luke, it's shepherds. In Matthew, it's the kingly and the wise. In Luke, it's the pure and the loving. In Matthew, the family has to flee to Egypt. In Luke, there's no such threat. In Matthew, he has brothers and sisters. In Luke, he's the only child. And if we look at the other two Gospels, Mark and John, both of them start at the baptism. So can we say that the births of Jesus are about Jesus, one Messiah, the kingly Messiah, one the priestly Messiah? But Mark and John are concerned about the Christ. So it's also important to know that Christmas wasn't even celebrated in early Christianity. Its first recording of being celebrated in the Roman Empire was in 354 AD. A lot of historians have tried to set the date based on Herod's death, which some put around the year 1 BC, which would put the slaughter of the innocents then before that. In Luke, there is no slaughter of the innocents. Again, we must ask, are these different stories? Could there have been two messiahs, where the Messiah means the human entity? Early Christianity, its focus was on the mystery of Golgotha and Easter. It saw its origin in the mystery wisdom, and it used Hellenistic philosophies to describe Christianity. Even St. Augustine later would say Christianity existed before the term Christianity came into existence. For them, Christmas was not important. For early Christians, the cosmic Christ entered Jesus at age 30. The cosmic Christ being the sun God. And this would be called the birth of Christ. In fact, the texts from the old times in these Gospels don't say, "in whom I am well pleased." It says, "today I have begot thee." That text was altered in later biblical versions. The Gnostics were sort of the first Christians besides the the followers of the apostles, tried to understand the mystery of Golgotha as this cosmic Christ, this sun God Christ. And here we see what in Greek mythology, how they would have depicted him. Here's another picture that we know of him with his chariot driving across the heavens. But very early Christians also depicted Christ in this way. This image was found in the Christian tomb of July in the Vatican necropolis in Rome. It's an example of early Christian art, and it equates Christ to the unconquered sun god, Helios, or the Ahura Mazda, or Ammon, or Ra. And if you look closely in this painting, you see a blue orb that he's carrying in his hand. And here in Salvator Mundi, Leonardo's recent painting that sold for $450 million, you see that Leonardo painted this earth in his hand. I was stunned when I saw in Ravenna the mosaics in the Arian, note the name, Arian baptistry. We heard about Arius before. And in this baptistry in Ravenna, this is mosaic work, you see the baptism. And here you see the Holy Spirit descending and will remain upon Jesus of Nazareth. Here is John the Baptist and his staff, and he is standing on the earth. This is the river god of the Jordan River, which is very interesting that paganism would have continued into Arian Christianity. These are the 12 apostles around, and this was built by King Theodoric the Great, who was an Arian Ostrogoth Christian. Arianism, by the way, you can see it here flowing through where the Germanic tribes were. So all of this with this kind of shading, so most of Europe and Northern Africa was under Arian rule, whereas Catholic was at one point only here under Constantinople and Orthodox. So we can say we have a problem. When did the two become one? Well, actually, the students take that up, Leonardo's students, that is, and they talk about the two becoming one in their paintings. And I have to give Rudolf Steiner credit because I would not have figured this out. But we would have to say that because the Luke was age 12, then the Jesus from Matthew must have been 13, 14, maybe even 15 or 16, depending on when before Luke Jesus he was born. In Luke's story, the family is with many others coming from Nazareth to Jerusalem. After walking there, on their way home, they discovered that they must have left their 12-year-old son back in the city. So they returned and finally found him in the temple conversing with its doctors after 3.5 days. Now, I'd like to point out what Steiner said is during those 3.5 days, a mystery school initiation took place behind the Holy of the Holies. We don't know who the Hierophant was, but these two children were essentially merged, you might say, where the spiritually perfected parts or entities of the Matthew Jesus came over to the Luke Jesus. So the ego and spiritually perfected astral and etheric came over and incorporated into the Luke Jesus. So then as a transformed Jesus, he becomes now the Jesus of Nazareth, and his parents can't understand what happened to their child who never before could express such things. And as it, well, we don't go into all the things it says in the Bible, but I want to show you this painting, which is 6th century Byzantine art that you can find today in a museum in Kiev in Ukraine. We don't know who the artist is, but you can see here is the Christ whose own aura spills into the aura or the glow around the heads of these two boys who seem to be 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. And so I read in this that there is this knowledge of the two messiahs, here they are being, and that they have a future relationship to the Christ together. So let's talk about the Hierophant and what happened in the Holy of the Holies in the temple. This is another student of Leonardo's, Bernardino di Beto, who's better known as Pinturicchio. This was painted in 1501, the same time that Raphael's painting was done. So he's painting this up in Milan. And this was as a fresco for a chapel, Santa Maria Maggiore in Spello, Italy. Sorry, my Italian's not so good. But I want you to notice the hands. So this is the merged Jesus, and you can see the doctors of the church here, and they've all cast their books down because this child is so much wiser than anything they find in their books. Here we see Joseph coming, and just to his left or our right would be Mary. But notice the hands here. Notice that same gesture of the two becoming one. But I also want you to look at their feet. And he is standing barefoot on the earth, touching down on the earth. But this child that we saw on the other side is wearing stocking feet. And this one is about to take him away. He's leaving with his bag. Notice the others above have bags. We'll pull up closer to see them next. Come on. And we see there are 4 individuals, one in black, one in blue, one in this gold. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Go back. And then this one in this sort of rose and green color. And then this individual with this interesting hat. And we can ask then, what do these books that they're carrying mean? What do these possessions, this bag here, he's holding this book in both hands. And we might come to the conclusion that these represent the fourfold human being of body, life body, soul, and spirit, or astral body, I should say, in ego. And lastly, this one represents the Hierophant that did the deed. This painting is by Ambrogio Bergononi, and he was also a student. And I have a quote from Luke here. And Jesus grew in wisdom, age, and grace before God and men. This will be the child who was the wise one. Here is his mother Mary and Joseph coming to find him. This one will later die in a few months, egoless. He will never be the same, obviously, for he has now brought his spiritual entities into this constitution. Behind, you see the curtain of the Holy of the Holies behind the curtain, which on Golgotha, this curtain is the one that will be rent in two. No longer could they work in the Holy of the Holies. And here you see him up on a kind of throne with his well, I'll call it his sort of aura, or his, I'm sorry, the word is escaping me, his, I'm so sorry. You can see it here, and it's reflected in a sense by all of the arches there. Boy, this is embarrassing when you must be age related. So another Jesus among the doctors, we've seen Bernardino Luini before, and here you see the gesture of the two becoming one, and it's just happened. And here you see the doctors of the church behind him. By the way, Leonardo's signature appears 3 times on the back of this painting. Da Fonte Ferrari painted this in 1526, which is after Leonardo had died. But we can see a couple interesting things. Here is a child. I wish the name didn't escape me. I'm going to kick myself tonight. His halo, thank you, there we go. So we have halo over Joseph, halo over Mary, halo over this child. Who is this child? We have here, and it's hard to see here, but there's a different kind of sun glowing halo. And back here, it looks almost like a moon, and another archway emphasizing the halo. And down here, we see the hand gesture of the two becoming one. And it's also interesting, before we finally come to a close, that in 1480, this painting was abandoned by Leonardo. It was called The Adoration of the Magi. And many an art historian has marveled at what a fantastic job he was doing. And so nobody can quite understand why he abandoned that. So in 1481, Filippino Lippi was given the commission for his own Adoration of the Magi, which he took to 1496 to complete. This became a substitute for Leonardo's, what he was supposed to have done, but stopped in 1480. I came to the conclusion that at this time, 1480, Leonardo had a kind of initiation by the followers of Platon, an initiation that we might say wasn't like the initiations of the ancient mystery centers, but nonetheless opened his eyes to early Christianity and some of the depths of Christianity, as well as other things. And so some of those other things might even be things like reincarnation. For if we look at the background, we can say that there's something quite special about these backgrounds, each child having a window in the rock formation behind. Let's look into these secrets. Could they be past lives? We see that in this window, that there are many rocks back here in this river of life, perhaps the river Styx, that when you cross, it's the river of forgetfulness. And we see many rock formations, rock representing earthly incarnations. Perhaps, as Steiner would say, this is the story of the lineage, the spiritual lineage of Zarathustra, who incarnates as one of the two messiahs. And then we will find that this rock window with just one pillar behind would be the story of this incarnation of the Adam Cadman, of the archetype of humanity that had no karma, that was still pure and had not fallen, had not gone through the fall. So I reached the conclusion that a mystery that was known to the early Christians is revealed in this Virgin of the Rocks. But I think we need to look at just a tiny bit more. We see here, by using sacred geometry in the isosceles triangle, that we have the hand outside the triangle, the three hands that are inside the sleeve, all pointing to something about the transfer that this woman here will do from this Jesus to this Jesus, from this Messiah to this Messiah. And so there will be three aspects to that, three spiritual aspects to that transfer. And then the physical body will remain as it is pointed here by the hand. We can say that these are soma, psyche, and pneuma. And by soma, we would call this in anthroposophy the etheric body, or the chi body, or the prana in Hinduism. But we also might say that by levels, this hand represents the human. This hand represents the activity of the angels. This, the archangels, and this, the archai. But then what would that make this being's representation, or the other hand? And I would say that would be the Elohim, or in Greek, the exousiai. So you must be asking, why were there two paintings then? Why didn't he just do the one? Okay, a little brief history, and it won't take us more than a couple of moments. We heard that Leonardo went to Milan to escape Savonarola's mobs and to take up employment with the Duke there of Milan. And in 1494 came the First Italian War, when King Charles of France invades. And Savonarola refused to send troops, which turns the populace against him. So when Charles returns in 1499 for the Second Italian War, this time Leonardo flees Milan, and he takes with him his paintings. But with things in turmoil, his partner, Ambrogio de Preti, has to stay and complete the paintings. Well, in that 1499, a legal dispute had began. And now with the French king and rule of Milan, the appeal from Ambrogio de Preti goes up all the way to the king. It's going to take 7 years for this legal dispute to be settled in 1506. And the legal dispute settlement requires that Leonardo return to, and all it says, complete the painting. In 1507, so Leonardo comes, and in 1507, the artists are paid. And in 1508, the painting is finally installed at the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception. Now, remember that this began in 1482-83, sort of right at the, in that time period. And here we are in 1508, it's finally installed. It won't be until 1625 that the original is spotted by an art connoisseur along with the Mona Lisa in the French royal collection. And I and several other historians have come to the conclusion that's because Leonardo took those with him when he went to live in France in the last years of his life, in a cottage. It was pretty much a mansion provided by the King of France. And so his paintings then joined the French royal collection. So there is the little chalet that he lived in and had his studio. And the conclusion. So later, all of this would be donated to the Louvre in France. So the second painting was because the first one, the confraternity held it until the second painting was ready. So obviously, Leonardo had to come up with another painting, a third painting, so he could take this with him in 1499 when the French invaded again. The confraternity rejected the original on theological grounds. You can see how much they were paying and the various bickerings for more and so on. And finally, the Duke had to intervene, and then that didn't work out, so finally the king had to intervene. So we find that finally the judge did look at what was in the legal agreement, and he was the one that agreed with the confraternity that this needed theological additions. So Leonardo returns, and what's he going to do? Already the varnish is on. Well, as a great chemist and painter, he convinces the confraternity that he can put this staff and halos on in such a manner that when the chapel is illuminated by candlelight, that these objects will pick up the candlelight and glow, which they did. So in 1508, it was installed. And I don't mention it here, but it became a place that people came to venerate when another illness epidemic came out, and they came there to be healed under candlelight under this painting. So now we've learned why the paint was above the varnish. We've learned why there were 2 or 3. We learned why it took so long, because the confraternity wouldn't accept it and they wouldn't agree until finally a judge decreed that they had to. And we also heard that Leonardo either learned this at the Platonic Academy or through his own initiation if he had one. We learned that he was depicting early Christian theological ideas, and that this would have been considered a heresy in his time of the 15th century. So we also heard about the two messiahs. We've heard about these early Christian theological ideas of two messiahs, a kingly and a priestly. We learned that they would consider that the cosmic Christ was born at the baptism into Jesus of Nazareth. And we learned about the role that Platon had in the birth of the Renaissance, and then in his role in influencing Leonardo. We found proof in the students' paintings and how they participated in revealing just enough, but not enough, to be called heretics by the Inquisition. But it comes to today, and I would hope that Leonardo's call for a Renaissance still reverberates and comes today as a call for Renaissance 2.0, a refinding of what was lost once at the Eighth Ecumenical Council, a refining of what the human being is, consisting of spirit, soul, and body, of soma, psyche, and pneuma. And so we also found that this third painting was done perhaps when this war was coming, so that the studio would still have a workable copy, or the confraternity would have a copy to hold until its theologically correct version would come. Notice that in here, the hand of the archangel is pointing, and we do have a halo on this Madonna, or whoever she is, but no halo on either of the boys. So it's a kind of compromise. We saw the smoking gun in Bernardino de Conti's painting, so we know that neither of those children is John the Baptist. And we saw in Pinturicchio's painting that the merger happened behind the Holy of the Holies in the temple when the 12-year-old Luke Jesus was left behind in Jerusalem. So I'd like to close with this one. It is Leonardo's own painting of John the Baptist. You know, because he's holding the staff of John the Baptist. But notice the hand gestures. Notice the two on his heart and the hand pointing up. The two have become one so that the Christ could enter. And notice his smirk. That is his beloved Salai, who both the church and public officials thought to be an unredeemable delinquent. Leonardo saved and loved Salai. He tried to teach him painting unsuccessfully, but used him as a model often for his paintings. And in this one, by having him be the model for John the Baptist, he's mocking the church. So at this point, we can take questions from anyone. And to do so, you'll need to hit the Q&A, I think. And Bill, you'll probably have to read them. I see Maxine Conradi raised her hand. Maxine, you can speak. If you see Maxine, you can unmute her. Here, I will stop.
Okay,
maybe I can do it. Maybe you can't do it.
I'm looking at Q&A here. Let's see. No open questions. So
Maxine, is your hand still raised? I'll go over to the chat.
okay, someone's typing now. Maxime? Okay, the question is, what do you understand as the esoteric significance of the holos of, or absence of halos, I believe, is what we're talking about.
Right. I would say that he's trying to show that those two boys were human beings. They were not some kind of higher beings. And so he would not have put halos over them.
Uh-huh. Okay, another question from Maxime. Yes, which is Luke and which is Matthew?
So the Matthew Jesus, as we look at it, is the one on the left with lots of rock pillars above in the window, as I called it, window. Whereas the Luke would have one rock in its window, meaning this was its first full earthly incarnation.
Okay, and from Richard Halford, is there such a thing as the Cairo document?
I would have to ask Richard if he could explain a little bit more by what he means by the Cairo document. Are you referring to Nag Hammadi in the texts that were found there, or something else?
Okay, I think we'll go on to the next question and maybe he'll be able to post again. Does Luke correspond, this is from Maxime Conradi. Does Luke correspond to Judah and corresponds to the priestly? And then does Matthew correspond to David?
Correct. The Luke would be the priestly lineage. And he even says that he goes through Nathan, the priest, who was the brother of Solomon, the king, which is the Matthew lineage. So David is in both of them. So it's another book for the future on how we get from two lineages out of David, a kingly lineage and a priestly. But as we know, David was the first full king for Israel.
Okay, we have a question from Robert Stewart. At what point did he suffer a stroke and was paralyzed on the right side, before or after the second painting?
Well, after that occurs in the 1500s, probably about 1509 or 1510. And it prevents him from doing more painting, but apparently it comes after what he did to touch up the painting, and paint on top of the varnish.
Okay, from Linda Lingane, if I said that right. Who are the women in the original?
So the one on the right is an archangel, but we'll have to leave it unidentified. It might be Uriel. A few anthroposophists have said, oh, it must be Michael. I don't think so. I think Uriel is probably a pretty good possibility. But the one in the middle, we would be inclined to say must be Mary the Madonna, but there are two Marys. And could a Mary do the transfer, be involved in the transfer, which is why I attribute this woman in the middle to being a being of the level of either the archai or more likely of the Elohim or Exousiai.
Okay. Okay, a question from Roxanne Anthony. If the child with the 3 thorns is the person who dies on the cross, what becomes of the other child?
So that's what happened at the temple when the Matthew and the Luke boys are, I don't like to use the word merged, but I'll use it for now. The Matthew boy brings over his spiritual entities to the Luke boy, and then he will die a few months later, according to Rudolf Steiner. So the one with the 3 thorns or 3 nails in his head is the one who will provide the physical body that we see with the hand on the rocks for Jesus of Nazareth, who will be then the vehicle used by the cosmic Christ to enter into becoming a man, a human being, I should probably say.
Okay, from Ted Petrenko, we have a question directly to Andrew. Andrew, when will we get the book?
So the book is, thank you, Ted, it's on Amazon today. You can order it. Just go there and look for the book, The Hidden Heretic of the Renaissance, Leonardo. But if you just put in Hidden Heretic, it will find it for you under books.
Okay, we have Richard Halford. I meant, what is the Damascus document?
So the Damascus document was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, what was found in the caves near Qumran. So they were considered Essene documents. Now, I don't know if you mean, does this relate to Paul's Damascus experience? And no, it does not relate to Paul's Damascus experience.
Okay, now from Maureen Flannery. Were Leonardo's student painters students of his philosophy as well as his art?
Yeah, good question, Maureen. I would say they swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. They were very, very moved by what Leonardo's philosophy and what he taught in his Platonic Academy in Milan. So he brought with him something from Florence to teach up there. And we don't know, they kept it secret.
Okay, we have a question from Jane Mealy. Did the Eastern Christian Church contain the esoteric knowledge, or was it in the Roman Latin churches too?
So in the beginning of early Christianity, you might say there was as many as 12 Christianities, and it probably grew. There was an esoteric knowledge. We know from a book called Secret Mark that there were initiations that were going on in early Christianity. This did not go even into the 2nd century, it appears, however, that what was needed by materialism and the development of freedom was recognized by the initiates. And so they pulled back, so to speak. And we then get this movement to stamp out the paganists, and anything to do with the ancient mysteries. So mobs come and destroy, with Roman blessing, those temples and all, at the ancient mystery centers. And so the leaders of those mystery centers are driven out of Christendom, and they go eastward. And I mentioned how Baghdad and its universities became the cultural center of the world. That's in part because these teachers go there to Baghdad, they're welcomed there, and they teach in the universities there. So that esoteric knowledge flowed with them, but even there, when Islam comes, the movement to materialism is overpowering. So we lose the esoteric knowledge even there. But much of that was recorded during Alexander's time. Aristotle sent Alexander out, not to conquer the world, that's what we say in history books, but to capture the esoteric wisdom of the mystery centers before it was all gone, before it was corrupted by the uprising of egoism. And so so wherever he went, he founded Alexandrias with great libraries. And the libraries were filled by the remaining mystics writing down what their mystery centers had known. So by the 4th century, that esoteric knowledge in the Roman Latin churches was gone, and in the Eastern churches by the 6th century, it was gone.
Okay, Robert Stewart has another question. Why have babies embracing when the transfer happens as teenagers?
Yeah, very good question. And if you had teenagers embracing, like in the Pistis Sophia, you would have had a hard time keeping the feeling of sexuality out. By using babies, they are pure and innocent of any sexuality. And with what happened to Leonardo at age 26 in being accused of sodomy, I'm sure he was quite reticent to use teenagers for that kissing scene.
Okay. All right, now Daniel Perez says, I believe there are 3 crosses, not 3 nails on the head of the one child.
Yeah, they look like crosses, that is correct. And many people have interpreted them as the 3 crosses on Golgotha. In either case, whether they're nails or crosses, they seem to be driven into that hill. And if you remember the saying in the book of Zohar, which says when he gains life again, when it talks about the little hill and the great hill. And we can say the little hill is this, the skull, and the great hill is Golgotha.
Interesting. Okay, Maureen Flannery again. Did the confraternity actually interpret the original painting as a depiction of the 2 Jesus children before the addition of the staff?
Right. We just know that they thought it was theologically insufficient and they wouldn't accept the painting as is. I would suspect that someone revealed to them that this was a painting about the 2 messiahs. And that might have further aggravated them, since their whole hope for fame was to be the church of the Immaculate Conception. That takes us into another thing, but if you know something about the Immaculate Conception of Mary herself, then this gets into a lot more as to why theologically this would have been a problem for them.
Okay, another question from Robert Stewart. When you showed Florence Platonic Academy, you showed Aristotle. What was their relationship there?
So Platon gave lectures about Plato and the other philosophers. And in particular, he spent a lot of time describing the difference between Plato and Aristotle. And in fact, I'm sure it was the inspiration to the School of Athens painting by Raphael. And he wrote a book which remained behind when he left on these differences. And that book would have been available to students like Raphael. So Aristotle was, in a sense, well known to France and Italy through the teachers that came from Harun al-Rashid to what became the Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne. But Plato was less known until Platon shows up and gives his lectures. He was known, but less appreciated.
Okay, we have a question from Maxime Conradi again. Is there a political reason there may be a royal double of Jesus?
Not that I can think of a political reason. And I'm not sure what, did you say it was Maxine was saying? About
Yes.
a royal double. I'm not sure that she means double in the way I think of double, like a luciferic or an Ahrimanic double in anthroposophical terminology. Did she mean double just meaning a second Jesus? And I think what she's alluding to is that in the time of these writings, that some academic might be saying that there could have been a political reason to including a kingly Messiah as well as a priestly Messiah,
Mm-hmm.
and to gather favor with the local king or something. But I don't think that was the case. I think, in fact, we may need to go all the way back to the stories of Cain and Abel and the karmic redemption of the fratricide. And I think we will find that that redemption of the fratricide happens behind the curtain in the Holy of the Holies, when the Matthew Jesus enters the Luke Jesus and gives up his life. You will find that the Cain passage, the Cain karma had passed to the Matthew Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And that Matthew Jesus is bringing about its redemption.
Okay. Robert Stewart. In the School of Athens by Raphael, is Plato Da Vinci?
Oh, there's all sorts of, yeah, that's a good one, Robert. Thank you. You know, people have speculated on who's who in a lot of them. I'm working with a wonderful colleague over in Europe. I won't say his name yet because I don't know if he wants me to bring it up, on the who's who in the School of Athens. So I'm not ready to say who's who. So can we skip that one? Sorry, Robert.
Okay. All right. Maxime Conradi says yes, that. And then we have Jane Mealy. Do you know if Platon or the Plato school teach about the Sophia?
Oh, of course. Sophia was the goddess of wisdom, and it would have been known, it was written about even by the Gnostic Christians. So that certainly went forward, and they would have known about all the Greek gods. So Sophia would have been one known to those participating in the Platonic school of Florence, as well as the Platonic school in Milan.
So we have one last comment, and maybe it's a good ending comment. Wow, thank you. From Maxime Conradi, if I'm saying that right. And
Well, I have to say, I thank all of you. We're not quite at 2 hours, but we're a good 30 minutes longer than I thought we might be. And that's mostly due to me trying to cram too much in, as I usually try to do. So thank you all for hanging out with me this long.
well, it's been wonderful, Andrew. Thank you. I'm sure there'd be a big applause right now if we had our mute buttons on off. I mean,
All right.
thank you so much.
Well, thank you all. And I guess we can bring this to an end now. Good night, all, and
Good night.
happy Whitsun to you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.